Okay, so we're going to look at histograms today. So we have a couple words to fill out first. So the first blank on the notes here, it says the frequency. So that's going to be the first blank that we want to fill out. The frequency of data is the number of times that specific value appears in a data set. So we're going to be looking at a list of numbers, and we're going to be trying to figure out how many times does that number appear in my list, okay? We're kind of counting, all right? And so then, what is a histogram? So that's the next blank. A histogram is a type of graph, and it shows how many times that data appears in intervals, okay? Sometimes it's each number at a time, but a lot of times we'll see an interval. And if you're wondering, well, what is an interval? So that's going to be our last blank to fill out today. So to create intervals, or to create histograms, we need to put our data in intervals, okay? So what is that? That's just by saying it's kind of like a range of numbers. And I will be giving you the intervals on the practice and on the test. Now, when you get into higher level math class, which this is the only time you're going to see statistics, which is why I'm trying to put it into this class, is because you're not going to see it in part 2. You're not going to see it in geometry. And really, you only need geometry and then you're done. So I'm trying to show us now, but you will be given the intervals, so you don't have to worry about that, but we'll talk about this, okay? So here's what this example is going to look like. We want to make a frequency table, and then we're going to create a histogram for the following data. So if we look at what we're given a list of height in inches at a local basketball club, okay? So here's just various heights of people, and so we want to list those intervals. Now, I will give you these numbers. So I'm going to tell us that our intervals are going to go from 60 to 63, 64 to 67, 68 to 71, and 72 to 75. So you will always be given that information on the homework. It will be printed for you. But we can kind of talk about how we get there. So we want to look at what is the lowest height that I see. So if we just quickly scan through my numbers here, 60 would be that lowest height, right? So 60 is our lowest. And then we can go to what is my largest height. It looks like 75. So we're just saying, we're kind of breaking down my range of numbers from 60 to 75. We're saying that's the amount, that's as many numbers as I see. And then I'm just kind of breaking that range down into small chunks or intervals, okay? So what do we do now? What is frequency? So we're actually going to count how many numbers fall within the range 60 to 63. How many times do I see that? So I like to take my pencil and I like to mark through and kind of make a tally. So 60, there's one that, and again, I'm just going to make tally marks. 60, I go through, here's a 63, so we make another tally mark there. Here's another 60, so I can make a tally mark. I don't see any other numbers in my list that are between 60 and 63. So hopefully that makes sense. All we're doing is we're just counting how many numbers fall within that range given to me, okay? So we can say my frequency would be 3. Or you can just, as long as you understand your tally marks, that's fine. Then I keep going. So 64 to 67. I'm looking for 64, 65, 66, or 67. So here's a 65. I can cross that off. There's one tally mark. I see a 64. There's another tally. There's another 64. There's another 65. And there's a 67 at the end. So how many marks did I make? I made 5. So my frequency there would be 5, meaning 5 numbers are within 64 to 67. And then I can keep going. So we have 68 through 71. So I'm looking for 68, 69, 70, or 71. Here's a 71. Here's a 70. Here's a 68. Another 68. And a 70. So again, we have 5 as my frequency. I made 5 tally marks. And then the last ones we have 72, 74, and 75. So those are 3 numbers there. Therefore, my frequency would be 3. So hopefully that, now that we see the picture, the end goal, that makes sense, right? So intervals is just, we're breaking down into even intervals, right? I'm not going to say a range from 60 to 65, and then my next range would be like 66 to 68. You want to keep it even, right? So it looks like we're choosing 4 numbers every time. So again, that will be given to you. You'll just need to know how to count, okay? So then what does this look like? What is a histogram? So that's just my frequency table. The histogram is going to be on the next page here. So you will be in charge of writing your intervals at the bottom, okay? So we have off to the side, and sometimes they'll be numbered, sometimes they won't. So the numbers are along the sides are the amount of numbers. So we'll get to that in a second. You're going to be in charge at the bottom of rewriting the intervals that were given to you, okay? So I can rewrite my interval 60 to 63, and then the next one was 64 to 67. The next one was 68 to 71. The next one was 72 to 75. So you want to try to spread it out how I do. Kind of spread that out. So if you have 4 intervals, kind of want to go about 1/4 of the way through. It's not going to be perfect, but you want it to look somewhat close to that. Okay? You want to use the entire length of your graph. And so what do I do now? So this is where along the side is your frequency. That's the count. So if I go back up to my 60 to 63, I had 3 numbers that fell within that category of 60 to 63. So what I want to do is I want to create a bar graph. Going up to 3 spaces, and you can kind of it's going to be a wide bar graph. So I'm kind of going around the 60 to 63, something that looks like that, okay? There's 3 numbers. There were 3 numbers within that category, okay? And you can shade it in if you want. If you like to use different colors, you can. If you maybe want to use a highlighter, that's fine. But that's what we're looking for, okay? My frequency was 3. You shade 3 lines up. There's that first bar, okay? And now I want to look at my next category. So the next category was from 64 to 67. So we can say, how many did we have there? 5. So I want to shade all the way up to 5. Now you want to keep them connected like this, so we can kind of create the next bar. So notice how my bar is kind of going halfway in between where I wrote my intervals like this. Again, you want it to be connected so the final product will look like a bar graph. So again, I'm shading up 5 spaces, and you can shade if you would like. If you want to use a different color, that's fine, or keep your same color. Okay, and then I keep going. So I look at what is my next interval. We have 68 to 71. So that also had a frequency of 5, so I'm keeping it at the same height there, which is why maybe different colors may be useful, because otherwise it will kind of look like a combined one. Okay. All right. So here's 68 to 71. And then finally, the last bar is from 72 to 75, so that frequency was 3. So we're going to shade 3 lines up, and that will complete my histogram. So a histogram is just a fancy way of saying a bar graph that represents the amount of numbers that you have in that list, okay? So that's kind of our final goal. So if we wanted to answer a couple questions about this, then we can do that. We have a nice organized view of the distribution of my numbers, right? If I just look at this list, it may be harder to kind of tell what are the patterns, where are the majority of my numbers. Where if I see this visual, I can see that majority of my numbers are between 64 and 71, right? I have 10 total numbers that are in there, and then we have some that kind of are on the outskirts, okay? So we'll kind of talk about the patterns that can come from this. So the first question is, how many heights in total were recorded? So there's a very fast way to do this, right? Remember that each line here represents a number. So I had 3 that were between 60 and 63. I had 5 that were between 64 and 67. 5 here, 3 here. So what is that in total? 5 plus 5 is 10. 3 plus 3 is 6. So 10 plus 6 is really 16. So we can add those up. So it's a nice visual way of seeing how many do we have in total. Okay, I have 16 total heights here. All right. And then we want to know how many heights were greater than or equal to 68 inches. Because we have it organized, I can locate, okay, greater than or equal to 68. So here's where the 68 inches start. So we could say 5 of them are in this category, and we also want to include the 3 because, right, all of these numbers are greater than 68. So in total, I would have 5 plus 3, which would be 8, okay? 8 heights were greater than or equal to 68 inches. So once you have that graph, it is easier than just kind of looking at a list and then having to count and go through all those numbers. The visual is very helpful, okay? Let's try that one more time, and then we will just talk about some distribution terms, then we'll stop there for today. So we want to try this again. We're going to create a histogram. Again, I'm going to give you the interval breakdown. So here's the interval breakdown. We're going from 11 to 19, 20 to 28, 29 to 37, 38 to 46, 47 to 55, and 56 to 64. So you won't ever have to come up with that. That would be more of an advanced math class. I'm going to give you that information, but we need to know what to do with that. So here's my information. We are given monthly precipitation, which is just rainfall in inches. And so we want to look at how many times do I see numbers in between 11 and 19. That's my first category. So I'm going through any number that falls between 11 and 19. Okay, that's going to be my first count. So I have 11.3, 11.6, 12.2, 13.5, and it looks like these are in order from least to greatest, so that is also very helpful. 15.5, and then the next number that I see is 20, which is larger than 19, so I'm done counting that 11 to 19 category. So we can say that my frequency is 5, okay? So then I'm looking at the next category. Any number that falls between 20 and 28, I am now counting. So I have 20, 21.2, 22.3, 25.4, because the next number is 29.6. That's higher than 28. So we would say this one has a frequency of 4. Now I'm looking all the numbers between 29 to 37. So it looks like 29.6. and 33.6. So that one would have a frequency of 2. Next category is any number between 38 and 46. Looks like there's just one number there, which is 40.1. Same thing, the next category, 47 to 55. There's just one number, 48.8 is in between those numbers. And then the final category, 56 to 64, there's only 59. That's the only number that's there. Okay, so if they're in order from least to greatest, that is really helpful. It's not always. So sometimes you will have to kind of go through, and that's why I recommend crossing out your numbers so you know that they've been used and they've been counted. And so now we really have to do everything. We're just given the lines. So we're going to kind of start from nothing. And the first thing that we can do is we can just label my numbers off to the side here, the frequency. So I can label them, we can just go up by ones. So we can say off to the side 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Again, that's my frequency, the amount of times we see those numbers appear. We always want to give ours a label, just like how this one had a label. We can just call this one the same thing that my data was titled. If my data was titled monthly precipitation, let's just call this monthly precipitation. Don't make it any harder than it needs to be, but we do want a label. And then now I can rewrite my intervals down here at the bottom. Now I do have a little bit more intervals, so you will want them closer together than how we did for that first example. So, but still trying to use the entire space. So I know we don't all have the best spatial awareness, but just give it your best shot and try to fit all of those numbers in. Because even mine isn't the best, right? I have mine kind of all squished together at the end, so that's fine. So try to spread it out, but we want to make sure all of the intervals are just rewritten down here at the bottom. So that's how kind of the homework will go. You will have to do all of that, set your histogram up. And now it's just a matter of filling in my bars. So that first category, we said we had a frequency of 5. So I can go shade up 5 boxes, which is right here. And again, you want to kind of create that bar. So that way the bar is kind of going around the 11 to 19 that you wrote. Okay, you want them to all be connected there. So here is my first bar, 11 to 19. And if you want to switch colors, you can. So the next one we had a frequency of 4. So we're going to shade up 4 spaces. Okay, the next one we had a frequency of 2. So we're going to shade 2 spaces. And then all the remaining ones we had a frequency of 1. So as long as you are showing that those are separate bars from each other, like if you're using a pencil, I would maybe shade in that boundary a little bit darker so that way you can tell that they are all different. They are separate from each other, but they will all be 1 for those last couple. Okay, so that's about as complicated as it's going to get. There really isn't much more beyond that. Histograms are very nice and easy. They're a good way to visualize all of your data, right? Majority of our numbers are down here. So let's kind of talk about what does this look like. This is a good representation of a skewed set of data. So this next page here is, or I think there's one more question actually with this that got moved to the next page. So there's one question that just says, what percent of months had precipitation greater than or equal to 47 inches? Okay, so we're looking for numbers that are greater than or equal to 47 inches. So if we go back up to my picture, I can look. Here's that 47. So I had one that was in this category higher than 47. But this category is also higher than 47. So we really have 2. So there were 2 numbers that were higher than 47. But I want to find what percentage of the months. It doesn't ask me how many, what percent. So here's where we want to count them all. And now that I have this nice visual, I can quickly count. We had 5 numbers here, 4 numbers here, 2, 1, 1. So we can say 5 plus 4 is 9, plus 2, which is 11, and then we have 12, 13, 14. 14 numbers in total, okay? So we can say the amount that was higher than 47 or equal to 47 is 2. We're going to put that over the total. That will tell me what that percent is as a decimal. And we actually want to type this in. So you would want to type in 2 divided by 14 to give me the decimal version of 0.143. But remember, that's the decimal. So we need to think back to all the work that we've done with percents. And we can convert that into its percent by moving it 2 times to the right. This is really 14.3%. Okay? So there will be some questions like that we'll get to again where you will have to count in total, put the question number over the total. Okay, now we're going to talk about very quickly here what are some ways that we can describe this data. So if we see data that looks like this, and that was kind of like the first example that we did, where it was lower on the sides, in the middle you see kind of a peak, okay? We would call this a symmetric histogram. We would call this symmetric, meaning that it follows a nice curve. Starts low, goes high, ends low. So that's perfectly symmetric. But what if we see something like this, where most of my data is lower on the right-hand side, okay? Again, if you need, this is the left-hand side, this is the right-hand side. If we have less data on the right-hand side, we're going to call this skewed right, okay? This sometimes confuses people because a lot of times people want to say, well, there's more on the left, so isn't it skewed left? It's whatever's lower. So if there's lower numbers on the right-hand side, we're saying it's skewed right, okay? So we're looking at the lower. So what does that mean about this next example? Now we are lower on the left-hand side, and we have more on the right-hand side. So you would call this one skewed left, okay? So you will want to be able to remember that terminology, because sometimes the questions will ask you, describe it, is it symmetric or is it skewed? And you'll have to tell me what direction. So if we want to look back at what we did, this one would be skewed right. We have lower on the right-hand side. We have a lot of data here on the left-hand side. Okay? So these last 2 examples for today, if we want to just tell whether it is symmetric, skewed right, or skewed left, we're just looking at that distribution. That was the one that we just did, right? That was symmetric. Good. Okay, so that's our exact example of what we just did for the basketball. And then, like I said, here's our monthly precipitation graphed out. I just said that was skewed right because there's less data there on the right. Okay, so we'll stop there for today. And let me pause this.